Illuminate the Lighthouse. Get out your lab notebook, sit comfortably, and give yourself permission to breathe a little slower than you have been so far today. Breathing in a little deeper, and then gently breathing out in a slow and relaxed manner. And gradually allowing your breathing to come to its own natural pace. All right. So, for today's experiment, we're going to turn our attention to the learning and the practice of skills for us to connect with our lives more fully in each moment. So, even while we're moving toward the life we truly want to live, closing those gaps and aligning our behavior with our core values, it can be surprisingly easy to be distracted, by our thoughts about the past or the future, to be reactive to our experiences, to avoid meaningful situations because we might be afraid they're going to be uncomfortable in the short term, to be living on autopilot in a sense, where we're actually missing out on a lot of what's really enjoyable about our lives moment by moment. And these skills we'll be practicing today fall under the term that you might have heard of before called mindfulness. And mindfulness means waking up from being on autopilot so we can more fully engage and be present in our life as it unfolds. So, to pay attention on purpose to each new presenting moment, to become aware of those evaluative judgments of judgee, but then to simply let those judgments arise and to pass away on their own without needing to engage in those thoughts if we feel the judgments are unlikely to be useful. So, not avoiding or suppressing moments that we judge to be unpleasant, and also not clinging to or, grasping onto moments that we judge to be pleasant. Just being open and aware and in touch with our life as it is. And now, because mindfulness is a skill, this stuff requires practice. And so you didn't learn how to play that musical instrument or, how to code that piece of software, how to prepare that gourmet meal, or how to fix that car overnight. And so just like those skills, it does take time and energy and practice for us to connect with our lives more fully. And especially with all the distractions that our world increasingly provides for us. So, if this stuff takes time and practice, why should we be mindful? And so, in addition to more fully engaging with our life and ultimately discovering our true nature, the research on mindfulness and cultivating this quality of mind with regular practice, this has been associated with many other beneficial outcomes. And so this includes decreases in anxiety, and depression, anger, irritability, and impulsivity, and also increasing our ability just to more effectively regulate our emotions in general. Also helping us to improve our cognitive functioning, so including improvements in learning and memory. Also deepening our relationships by, allowing us to be more present and connected to the people in our lives. And also improving our ability to be more self aware of how our bodily sensations and our thoughts and emotions and our behaviors are moving us either towards or away from the lives we truly want to live. So, for our experiment today, we're going to begin this process of more fully connecting with our lives by actually observing our experience in each new presenting moment. And we're going to start with observing what we often consider to be the world outside of ourselves. So, doing this with our five senses, our bodily sensations of sights, sounds, smells, taste, and touch as they arise and fall. And in our next experiment, we'll dive into observing the world we consider to be inside of ourselves. This includes our internal body sensations, the process of thinking, and the content of our thoughts as they appear and disappear, and observing emotions and urges to react to various aspects of our experience. And so, in both experiments, we're going to be observing all of these experiences on purpose, in the present moment, without evaluatively judging, pushing away, or clinging on to any aspect of our experience. And we can think of this skill of observing as being similar to turning on a light for us to see more clearly what's present in our external environment and internally within our body and the various rooms of our mind, so we can more effectively navigate towards our values and the life we truly want to live. And so, when the rooms of our mind and our external environment are pretty dimly lit, and we might be navigating on autopilot without much awareness, we're much more likely to trip and to stumble over furniture in these rooms and to keep slamming into obstacles in our daily life. And, sometimes turning on the light can be pretty uncomfortable. So, for example, if you're like me, it might have been difficult to discover the gaps you identified that currently exist between your core values and your typical way of behaving each day. And then to start that process of closing those gaps. And when we begin illuminating our life with this light of mindfulness, we might really dislike the furniture in the rooms of our mind and the obstacles we now see more clearly all around us. And so observing more clearly can bring us into contact with the facts of our lives, which, yeah, it might be painful in the short term, but which can ultimately allow us to turn towards and accept these facts as they actually are. And then this opens up the possibility for us to make incredibly meaningful changes to these facts and to our lives in each new presenting moment. So, we can rearrange or clean or reupholster our furniture. And we can also go around or over or under or through our obstacles, if we choose to do so. Okay, so enough talking and more experiencing. So, in this moment, become aware that what you observe depends on where you focus your attention. And so, attention is like a spotlight that we can either expand or narrow and move all around throughout this wide open space of our awareness. So, to test this out, please move your spotlight of attention down to the fingertips of your right hand. And now go ahead and touch something with these fingertips. Wherever you happen to be, maybe the surface of your desk or a table, a part of the clothing you're currently wearing, whatever's around you that you can touch with your fingertips. And then simply notice the sensations of touch that are currently arising. You might observe sensations of pressure, force or weight that are being applied to your fingertips. And this is how you perceive physical contact with your environment. And maybe you might observe differences in temperature, sensations you might describe as hot or cold, which can help us to respond effectively to changes in our environment and to regulate our body temperature. And maybe noticing the texture of what you're currently feeling, which allows us to identify and to distinguish objects based on, their tactile qualities. Things we might describe as being smooth or rough, coarse or soft. And as you're observing, you might notice sensations of vibration, those rapid oscillations, which can help us notice movement. You might notice sensations of pain, either in your fingertips or maybe in other areas of your body, which can really alert us and help us to protect our body from potential damage or injury. Occasionally, you might notice these irritating sensations we often call itching, which, we tend to judge and evaluate as being unpleasant. And it's often followed by this strong urge to move in the form of scratching. And, if you want to play around, the next time you do notice an itch and a resulting urge to scratch that itch, you might just notice what happens to that urge and to the itching sensation itself if you just simply observe these sensations and urges without acting on them. How long do these urges and sensations last? Do they continue to increase in intensity? Do they eventually kind of peak and then ultimately go down on their own? And as you're observing, you may frequently notice that your spotlight of attention has moved away, from the sensations at your fingertips of your right hand. It's moved away entirely. So maybe your spotlight was dragged to thoughts about the future or the past, or some distraction in your environment captured your spotlight. Just rest assured that this is extremely common, especially if you're new to practicing these skills. And so when your spotlight inevitably gets pulled away, just simply notice whatever it was that shifted your spotlight away from your fingertips without evaluating yourself or your experience judgmentally as good or bad, right or wrong. And then simply return your spotlight back to the focus of this experiment, which, right now is currently on sensations in the fingertips of your right hand. And by continually noticing when your spotlight gets pulled away, and then gently bringing the spotlight back with openness and without judgment, you're continually building this muscle of mindfulness. Okay. And so now please slowly move your spotlight of attention from the fingertips of your right hand up to sensations in your right wrist and forearm, and then up further to your right biceps muscle, up to your right shoulder, and then up to any sensations you might notice around the surface of your neck, up to sensations in your chin and your cheeks, and then all the way up until you settle your spotlight on observing the various sensations of sight. So, of perceiving and interpreting the world through your sense of vision. And simply observe the sensations of seeing that are currently arising. You might observe differences in the intensity of light, that we call brightness, which can allow us to distinguish between bright and dim environments or objects. And just notice the richness of all the colors that are currently filling up your awareness as you look around. Possibly observing these colors almost as if it was the first time you were seeing, these different hues and shades. And as you do this, also notice how automatically your mind describes the colors that you're observing with labels, like green, red, blue. And when this happens, also notice that these labels are descriptions of your experience, but they're not actually part of the raw data of your experience of perceiving, these different wavelengths of light that we call color. And become aware of the different shapes that you notice in your environment. Noticing all the different forms and outlines of objects, perceiving their contours and their boundaries in your present environment. Once again, if you notice your spotlights wandered off from your visual experience, notice what took your attention away, and then bring your attention back without any judgment to the sensations of seeing. And now become aware of the perception of depth. This allows us to notice the three-dimensional relationship and the relative distances between objects in space. So you might hold out your hand in front of you and notice that you can observe the space behind your hand. You can also observe the space to the sides of your hand. And you can also observe the open space between your hand and this wide open space that you're currently observing from. And now observe the visual perception of motion in your environment. This detection of movement allowing us to, notice movement of our own body and the motion of other objects throughout our ever changing environment. And this helps us to, effectively navigate and track objects and make sense of what's happening in the world around us. Just giving yourself permission to take a few moments and appreciating all the movement that's happening all around you in this present moment. And perhaps observing that all these sensations of seeing are working together to form this incredibly rich visual experience that helps us to navigate and perceive colors and shapes and movements and to understand the world all around us. Facts that we might often take for granted as we go about our daily lives. Okay, so now please slowly move your spotlight of attention from the sensations of sight and see if you can expand the spotlight horizontally. So to the sides of where you imagine your ears to be in this wide open space of awareness. Until eventually you settle your spotlight on observing the various sensations of sound, of perceiving and interpreting the world through your sense of hearing. And simply observe the sounds that are currently arising in this present moment. You might observe differences in the intensity, or loudness or volume of different sounds. Perhaps noticing differences in pitch, which allows us to distinguish between relatively high pitched sounds, like birds chirping, from relatively low pitched sounds, like, the rumble of an engine from a truck down the road. And also see if you can observe the silences between the sounds in your environment. And also become aware of your ability to perceive the direction of where all these various sounds in your environment are coming from. This sense of directionality relies on our ears' spatial cues, like differences in arrival time and the sound intensity between our ears. And also notice the duration of various sounds, allowing us to distinguish between sounds that are relatively short and relatively long. And once again, possibly appreciating how all these sensations of hearing combine together to form this incredibly rich and nuanced experience in each presenting moment. Okay, so you've observed various sensations of touch and sight and sound, and now gradually move your spotlight of attention from the sensations of hearing, slowly shrinking that spotlight down from both of your ears until it eventually reaches a point between your eyes. And then let the spotlight float down until it reaches the tip of your nose, and then allowing the spotlight to move inside both of your nostrils for you to start observing the various sensations of smell. So, while breathing in and out, observe the various odors that might be currently arising in this present moment. With odor being the specific smells that are associated with a particular object or substance. And so you might experiment with bringing something in your environment close to your nose and then to observe the odor, and the strength or intensity of that smell. So possibly a piece of food or a drink, maybe part of your hand or your arm or the shirt you're currently wearing, whatever you'd like, just observing these odors and also noticing whether your mind might be automatically evaluating these smells with judgments of pleasant or unpleasant, good or bad. And you might also notice whether certain smells in your environment bring up specific memories or specific emotions that might be associated with your previous experiences that you've had with certain smells. And just like before, maybe taking some time to appreciate how all these sensations of smell, how they combine and play a really critical role in our perception of flavors, our enjoyment of foods and drinks, also detection of, potential dangers like spoiled food or gas leaks, and also triggering different memories or emotions. Okay, so you've observed sensations of touch and sight and sound and smell. And now, please slowly move your spotlight of attention outside of your nostrils, once again to the tip of your nose, and then move that spotlight down to become aware of sensations, on your lips and around your mouth, and then moving the spotlight inside of your mouth and all around the surface of your tongue. So you can begin observing the various sensations of taste. And simply notice any taste sensations that might be present in this moment. And if there's not much you're observing, you can look around and maybe take a drink of something nearby. Maybe put a piece of gum or a mint or some food in your mouth, or just gradually move your tongue all around inside your mouth to observe any sensations of taste. You might notice sweetness. So, sensations we associate with sugars and sweet substances in foods like fruits and desserts. Maybe you might notice sourness. Sometimes we associate with acidic substances in food like, citrus, vinegar, or sour candies. You might notice saltiness, that we would taste in salted snacks or preserved food. Maybe noticing bitterness, that we find in foods like dark chocolate, coffee, certain vegetables like broccoli, or maybe observing taste sensations of umami, that we associate with more savory foods like mushrooms and meat and soy sauce. Just observing any taste sensations that may be present. And again, appreciating how these combine to create a really complex range of flavors and how these can also interact with other sensations, like smell and texture that give us this overall perception of taste and also our enjoyment of a lot of different foods during our daily life. All right. So now you've observed sensations of touch, sight, sound, smell, and taste. And these are our five senses of the world that we generally perceive to be outside of ourselves. And so now go ahead and take that spotlight of attention out of your mouth and see if you can gradually open and expand your spotlight wider and wider. Really expand that spotlight all around your face, opening it up to include your chest and your torso, your legs and your feet, expanding it out and opening it up completely to include your whole body and the entire space of your environment surrounding you in this present moment. Opening that spotlight of attention until it kind of blends and merges seamlessly into this open field of awareness. This wide open space where you can observe all the sensations of the outside world. Being here right now in this present moment, take some time to observe all sensory experiences that you're currently aware of. Sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touch sensations. Just allowing yourself to be completely aware of your present experience, not pushing away what judgy evaluates to be unpleasant, not trying to hold on to, what judgy judges to be pleasant. Just giving yourself permission to observe these incredibly complex and rich and wonderful experiences. Really opening up and illuminating your experience of the world in each new presenting moment. Okay. And so now let's take a few moments to reflect on and to write out, in your lab notebook, what you observed during this experiment. And as always, feeling free to pause the audio if you need some more time to write as I prompt you with a few of these open questions. So, what was it like for you as you turned on the light and gave yourself permission to observe these sensations of touch, sight, sound, smell, and taste? Were you able to move your spotlight of attention around your body and, all around through the external environment? What was that like? And at different times, did you notice that your spotlight was being taken away from the present moment, as you moved throughout the experiment? And if so, what tended to carry your attention away? And were you able to bring your spotlight back to the present without getting too caught up in those evaluative judgments from judgee? And what was it like to kind of gradually open and expand your spotlight of attention to merge with that wide open awareness of any sensations that were arising in each moment? And finally, here, how might your experiences in this experiment apply to the life that you truly want to live? You know, closing those gaps between your core values and how you're tending to use your time and your attention in each moment. Just taking all the time you need here to write down any additional observations before we move on. Okay. And so now, as we bring this experiment to an end and you continue with the rest of your day, you might continue practicing the skill of observing the present moment again and again and again. So, as you're going about your day, when you notice your spotlight of attention has been pulled out of the present, maybe becoming lost in distractions, finding yourself on autopilot while you're driving or while you're scrolling social media, maybe carried away into that conceptual past or future by thought. See how your life might change as you observe this quality of distraction, and then gradually returning your attention and your awareness to this next presenting moment as you continue moving toward this life you truly want to live.